Okay, hey everybody. So we are back for part two of our how to make a landscape in Blender. So for those of you who watched part one, for this video I won't be showing my disguise. Um it's just not that practical right now. So I say we just hop right in and I'll show you guys how to create the texture for this landscape. So of course last video I didn't have my hotkeys or screen keys available. Now I do. I just downloaded an add-on and you can see right here. Like, you can see exactly what I click on. So hopefully that helps if you weren't able to follow the previous video as well. So for those of you who are new or who just want to watch this tutorial or this texture part of the tutorial, in the last video we created this base mesh, which is going to serve as our landscape base mesh. And so now we are going to start creating the texture for that. So, um, yeah, I say we just get started. I don't really have anything else to say. So here we go. So enable this, and then we can come here. So I use cycles. I use cycles to render. You can use Eevee, but it doesn't look as good. And then if we come up here, like right now, I've got my screen lights and my scene lights and scene world enabled. View our landscape. We just want to view it in like pretty much daylight. So what we're going to do is we are going to enable or disable scene lights and disable scene world. And then you can pick one of these HDRIs. So these are all HDRIs that come naturally with Blender. One thing though is that when you render, you won't render with it. To do that, you'll need to apply it as a world texture, but we'll talk about that later. For now, we're just gonna go with the sunrise HDRI. So of course, as you can see, this is what our landscape looks like so far. So let's start with the texturing. So what I usually do, I don't like to use the shading workspace. I usually just kind of pull up the timeline and then I change it from right here, from timeline to shader editor. Now when you come to shader editor, your mesh will most likely already have material. If it doesn't, you can just come here and you can just add the material like that, right? So now we have a material. And then you can see you have a principal BSDF and a material output. So the material output is obviously what lets you see the material that you've created on your mesh, right? If we take this off, there's nothing because our mesh doesn't have anything on its surface. So now we've got this principal BSDF. Your principal BSDF naturally has a few values, so it has the metallic, the roughness, the index of refraction, just an alpha value, which is just transparency, a normal, which you can use for normal maps, subsurface, which is sort of how light refracts inside of your mesh. So this is what you could use for fleshy materials or waxy materials. So you can see if I turn up the weight, you can kind of see it. I mean, you need to be more in the light, but if you have light shining from behind, you'll be able to see it a bit easier. Alright, let me zoom out. You can hear my mouse wheel swirling. And of course, you can see if we up my laptop does not like this. If we up the scale, you can kind of see what it does, right? And then you can change the color by changing the radius. So this value will kind of change that. This value will make it a bit more like green. It's like I think the way or the amount that light passes into the object, I think, is what radius does. I'm not sure. Like, yeah, I'm not exactly sure how this fully works, but what I do know is, subsurface gives it like this waxy look. It's already pretty cool, but this is not what we're going for, of course. So for now, we're just going to put this back at 1 and put the weight back to 0. You can also just click on backspace. That will reset all of your values or set them to 0, which we're not going to do for this right now. Okay. Then some other like attributes that we have of the principal BSDF is the specular, which determines, I guess, the specular of your mesh, so like how shiny it is. So you can see if we up the IQR level, it will reflect light more. It'll be a bit more glossy almost. So we can bring the specular fully down. You see it's nothing. We bring it all the way up. It's a little glossy. So we're going to bring this to 0.5 with a roughness of 0.5 as well. We're going to do this all later. And then we still have the transmission, coat, sheen, and emission. Those are not important for what we're doing today. The ones that are the most important are the specular and the roughness. And maybe a little bit of the metallic, but we'll look at that later. So our mesh, our landscape, consists of two parts. The rocky parts, which I guess I'm going to get my pen, so I like to draw the rocky parts, which is like, sorry, the rocky parts. Whoa, what's going on here? There we go. This one, this was still from last time. So let's see if we can draw here. The rocky parts, which is like this region. Yeah, I like all of this. And then we'll have the grass parts. So I'm gonna give this a different color. Which is like this area, right? This is all of the grassy areas. So these are gonna be the grassy areas. Everything that's essentially, when we view it from the top, everything that you can see from the top is gonna be grassy. So how are we gonna do this? How are we gonna split our um our mesh into a area that we can assign grassy parts to and an area that we can assign these rocky parts to, right? So one thing that you could probably do is, come into your Z, go to edit mode, and then just like select all of the vertices at the top and turn this into a new vertex group. And then you can, or not a new vertex group actually, just create a new material and assign it to this, right? So now if we view this and we change this to green, you get like, I guess grass. But of course, as you can see, it doesn't really look that good. It doesn't work that well. So we're going to try to do it all in one material. So what we're going to do is we're going to come to geometry and we're going to take the normal. So the normal is essentially, if you've had math, it's like I'm gonna delete these. It's like the direction that your geometry points in. I'm so sorry about that, guys. Okay. The direction that your geometry points in. So this is like our normal of our geometry, right? So let's call it N. And we can use this if we separate it, the X, Y, Z, we can use this to separate the Z value. Now we know everything that's like visible. If we essentially imagine a ray coming from the top, everything that would be visible to this light ray, right? This L. Okay, we're gonna remove that. We're gonna take a color ramp and we're gonna try clamp it as much as possible. The reason why we're gonna want to do that, or we're gonna try give it as much contrast as possible. Actually, I'm just gonna do here. The reason why we want to do that is because we want a clear separation between the rocky and grassy parts. Right now, it's very smooth, of course, as you can see. We want it to be a bit more aggressive. Something like that. Now, what I usually like to do, because this is very clean, is I will add a noise texture. Let's subtract math node set to subtract. I'll take this noise texture, add a color ramp, gonna scale it, a bit more detail, a bit more roughness. Now this is, if you remember last time, we went to preferences and we added the add-on node ramp. This is where node wrangler is going to come in handy. Node wrangler doesn't really add anything to Blender, it just makes your process faster. So now that I have Node Wrangler enabled, I can click on Control T, and then I can immediately add a texture coordinate and mapping node. So this is essentially just going to map the textures to like different properties. What I usually do is I use object. So object just, it uses like the scale and the size of your object and just makes everything fit correctly. right? Generated kind of squashes it down because it's using the the global scale. I don't know if I'm explaining it correctly, but I hope you understand what I mean, right? So we're going to use object for this. And then we can just change the scale. So we're going to bring it pretty high, right? And then we're going to use the roughness to give it a bit more, make it a bit more rough. You'll see that it becomes a bit more noisy, right? So something like that. And then you can play around with this value. And then we're going to subtract it from this. So now what you can see is rather than having something that looked like, I guess I could show you like this, we get something that looks like this. So just pull this in a little, pull that out, and we can get like little clumps of rock through our grass. I'm gonna pull the black a little closer. I get something like this. And then maybe if you want to change the edge, you can take a noise texture here. Mix it to, I did that just by Control Shift and then left right click. Sorry, Control Shift right click, and you can join the two together with a mix. So now it's set to color. We come here, and now you kind of see how it plays with them. So we're just going to go something like this. Plug this into there, and we get like a little cool wavy effect. This is because we're using position here, and we should be using right. Here we go. And we get something like this, and then you can just play with the color factor till you get something that you like. I like something like this, so I'm going to make this a little more rough. And that way our landscape just doesn't look so clean, right? We get a bit of roughness in the edges. We can up it even more, up the scale a little bit more, something like that, right? Then I get something like this, which looks pretty cool. If you ask me, right? That looks pretty good. So this is going to be our mask, right? This is going to be our mask or separation for the rocky and grassy parts. So all the white areas are going to be grassy, and all of the black areas are going to be rocky. So we can already kind of see what this will look like. I'm going to add a diffuse BSDF for the grassy parts. I'm just going to bring this a little down, something like that. Combine the two together, plug this in, flip this around, and now you can kind of see what we would get. So this kind of gives us a pretty good idea of what where our grassy areas would be, right? At the moment, it doesn't look like that much, but it will. Trust the process. So we can just make this a bit more sharp. Another thing that you can do is put some constant. And now you can kind of see you get something like this, which I quite like. I think I might pull this down a little more like that, make this constant too. And just like pull it like that. There we go. And it looks pretty good. So now you're probably looking at this and you're like, that looks so bad. So we're going to fix that. The first thing that we're going to work on is the rocky texture. So for our rocky texture, we are going to use our favorite node, the noise texture. The noise texture immediately just gives us this very rough, rocky look. So we're going to up the roughness, and we're going to use a bunch of different ones, which we're going to combine together. So one like this, another one with a higher scale, and then we're going to duplicate this, and we are going to take another one where we are just going to scale it on one of these axes. So I think I'm going to, scale it on the Z to get it a bit flat down. That's going to give us some streaks in our landscape, right? Reference like that. Look pretty good. So now we're going to combine them. So we mix these first two together. You can use different mixes. I usually just use the normal basic mix, color, and then we can just pull this in. So we get something like this, which looks decent. And then we combine this last one, and we get something that looks a bit more like rocky in certain areas. You can also use this as like a factor, and then plug this one in here, and this will just give you like some regions where it's really rough with those lines, and some regions where it's not as rough. So ease, just get it in, and then we're going to use a color ramp for the entire thing. Okay. So now if we look from the camera, we just want it to be detailed. We want it to feel like it's like this actual like rocky, rough place. So right now I'm not seeing enough details. What I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate this one, these small lines, and I am going to scale it up a lot more. I'm going to change the roughness a little, and then I'm going to combine it with this one as well. So if I get something like this, that's a bit too much. That's a little better. So I'm starting to see like the detail that I want to see, right? So now in this color ramp, we're going to play with the colors. So this will kind of make like a dark brown. This will make like a sandy brown color, which would be the main color for our mesh. And then we'll make this like dark gray. You can make it either really dark or like a lighter one. I'm going to go for pretty dark gray like that. You just kind of want to play around till you get something that feels right. And then we get something like this. So if we plug this into the base color, it gives us this, which, you know, if you don't really like it, you can still play around with it. I'm going to push it around a little bit more like that. I'm going to use this color ramp to just add a bit more detail. So we'll do something like this and give it a sort of gray color. And just, yeah. I think something like that would look pretty cool. So this is what we've got. Now this still doesn't look great. And the reason why is because even though we've got all this detail in our texture, we don't see the detail on the surface. The surface is still very flat and smooth. So to fix that, we're going to use a normal map. So to make our black and white texture a normal map, we are going to use a bump node. So the bump node is basically just going to convert the black and white values into a normal map, which will decide the height and depth that we see in the roughness of our landscape. Right? So now we get this, which is already looking a lot better. So we're going to change the strength to make it something that we like, something like that. You know, if we plug this into the normal, that already helps a lot, right? Now our rocky landscape looks a lot more rocky. But we can do better. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this big one, and I'm going to use a displacement. So the difference between bump and displacement is bump is like a texture. It's not really affecting the normals. It's just, or it's not really affecting the geometry. It's just affecting, it's like basically the same thing as the color ramp, but then just with darker values to make it, to give you an illusion of depth. But if we look at it right now, there is no difference, right? It's actually still flat. Of course, as you can see, it's like it hasn't changed our geometry at all. It's just giving us this illusion that there is this like insane amount of detail, which looks great from far away. From close by, it doesn't look as good. But we're not worried about close by since this landscape is going to be from relatively far away. What we can, however, do to give our landscape a bit more variation is using displacement. So we plug our displacement in right now, and we're going to see a little bit of difference. But it looks a little weird, doesn't it, right? So you can change the scale, I guess. It still looks weird. And that's because we haven't applied our displacement correctly to our material yet. So what you're going to do is you're going to come to your material, We're going to scroll down to settings, and then you're going to change the displacement from bump only to displacement and bump. So now you see we get this insane, crazy displacement, and we're just going to scale it till we get something that we like. So I think something like this looks pretty good. You're going to want to come pretty close so that you can see what it looks like. Your actual bump material, and like that. Now this is already giving us a pretty cool rocky texture. So now let's add in the grass. So the grass works very similar to the rock, I guess, and that's that we use a noise texture. Actually, I'm just going to just duplicate this, and a bump texture. Those are going to be the two main nodes that we use for the grass. So let's come here, let's do this, and then a color ramp. And just going to see what this looks like. So we're going to move this around. Let's do it like this. That looks pretty good. We're going to take this color that we chose for the grass before, plug that in, and we are going to change this one to a darker green. And then we're going to plug the noise into the height. Going to bring it down a little, just like that. And now, if we look at our diffuse, we get something like this. Another thing that you can do is play around with the roughness. But I usually just put my roughness at like 0.75, a pretty high value. And like this, we get some grass. So you can add like more patches, I guess. You can even add different colors using like randomize and stuff like that. But I think what we've got now is like more than good enough, right? It looks pretty cool. And it gives us like some nice grass, or a nice illusion of like moss or grass on our texture. So now we're going to mix the two together, and what you're going to see now is that it's not going to make sense at all. Okay, this doesn't look bad, but our Z value now doesn't make sense anymore, right? It's super detailed. But I kind of want that less detailed version back. So what we're going to do is we're going to plug out this displacement, because remember, the displacement is affecting our normals. So plugging in the displacement is going to also change our where is it? Our geometry and our normal map. So we're going to plug this out, and I am going to use this as a map. I'm going to make this constant, and we are going to use a mix, and we are going to use this as a factor. So the other color we're just going to make white. The other color we're just going to make white. And then we're going to plug this into the height and plug that back into the displacement. Right? So now you see we get something crazy like this. But our area where we wanted our grass is normally displaced, or looks normal. So now to change this, because now it looks really weird. Like we've got this patch that's just sticking out. So we're just going to bring this value down till we get something that feels normal, right? So for me, it's around there. And then we can plug this in, and of course now you can see we've got our normal grass patch back. Now this does, however, mean that we don't get that displacement on the grass, but we can add that back in. And you can do that by taking a mix, something like that, whichever one you want. I think I'm going to take this one, and I'm going to make the values a lot closer to each other, so like that. And then just plug that. I'll take a math, multiply it by this value, so we can just come here and plug that in there. Now you'll see that our displacement will still have that roughness on the grass as well. And of course, as you can see, it didn't work as well, so we might have to change this value a little to account for the difference in color. So you can see we get something like this. Does it look a lot better? I don't know. You can always play around with this color again to add more grass in. And kind of just come something like this. Just make it a little more grassy in certain areas. Yeah, I think I quite like that. It's kind of how you can get this mountain texture. This is very general. There are a lot of other stuff that you can do. You can also just play around with it. Then you add something like this, and then you get a bit of a different texture. I think I quite like this more to this one. I prefer this we got here like that to prefer this to this. So I think I'm just going to use that one. Stick with that. I feel like we see a bit more of the grassy areas here, a bit nicer. But yeah, that is pretty much it for the grass for the landscape. And we're gonna then build upon this, of course, in the next video. But and we get something like this. So just imagine some trees here, some trees there, some smaller trees in the foreground, maybe like a little river or some water. You can already start to see the vision, right? Some clouds at the back.